Having spoken a lot about both Jurassic Park and Walking with Dinosaurs as the two most influential pieces of paleomedia to exist, I've mentioned before that both ushered in a golden age of paleomedia. Jurassic Park made dinosaurs popular. Walking with Dinosaurs reminded the world that they were both animals, and suitable for the silver screen as well. As such, they were followed by a notable era of other documentaries and a few films that made up the rest of the golden age. The era of the highest amount of professionally made paleo productions that still remain reasonably well liked by many. Whilst most are probably not large, interesting or influential enough for whole videos, let's meander on through the best of the rest. One thing notable about the golden era is just how much of the media was made for TV, and often with an educational slant to it. Hollywood had maybe one or two B-movies, but the only real noteworthy big blockbuster of the golden era that wasn't Jurassic Park was Disney's Dinosaur. Dinosaur occupies a weird place in the Disney adult sphere, in that being an atypical Disney film it receives very little attention and is often looked back upon poorly. Indeed, this was one for the Dino kids. As a Dino kid in this era, I certainly liked it. And if I remember correctly, I think it was the second film I ever saw in cinema. First was Tarzan, and if I remember correctly, they had the opening for Dinosaur as its trailer with Tarzan. But 25 years or so later, how well has Dinosaur aged both as a film and as paleomedia? And I think it's fair to say it's remained fairly static as both. To start with an evaluation of Dinosaur as a film, there was a lot of buzz around it at the time. It did okay in the box office, and actually had a bit of a bigger ripple than first thought. James Newton Howard did the excellent score. And it was actually one of his first big ones that rightfully led to fair acclaim, and resulted in him becoming a much bigger name in the industry, going on to score such films as The Hunger Games, Nolan's Batman, and M. Night Shyamalan at his cultural peak. And effects-wise, everything does look fantastic as well. Like, really, wow. For 1999, some of the shots and models border on 2019's Lion King / Prehistoric Planet level good. Ironically, despite being the main characters, the Iguanodons probably look the worst. And the Carnotaurus probably won't ever look bad, except for that one close-up of its eye. But the praise generally runs aground when it comes to the whole being a film thing, and in the past many have attributed this to the story. But to be fair to the writers and directors, this was a rock and a hard place. Dinosaur juggles trying to have essentially human characters without being a film, where the dinosaurs / animals are just interchangeable with people, like most Disney films. And it sort of succeeds, with Baleen not being able to fulfill her roles in the story without being anything other than a sauropod. And for the most part, the herd is driven by the whip that is the threat of predation from the back or starvation from the front, that you could do with people but feels a lot more fitting with animals. The main thrust of the drama, not so much, but it also doesn't spill over into two purely human affairs, as Dinosaur's story isn't necessarily bad. It's just not especially deep. It's essentially just a migration to the promised land, and does undeniably have strong shades of Moses to it, with the crossing of the desert, and then a dramatic ending with the choosing of a worthy new leader, the deposition of a tyrant, and the extermination of a predator in a suitably climactic battle. So really, the big thing that hamstrings Dinosaur, rather, is its characters. And it really is just the fact that no one really has much of an arc outside of Bruton, who is the film's most interesting character. If the visual companion book that every film in the 2000s got is to be believed, he had a herd of his own, and the film does make a few good nods to suggest Bruton may be the better and more compassionate leader, suggesting they rest further up in shelter, instead of being forced to fight for it as Crone clearly wants, or his greater optimism on seeing the dried lake. Bruton's mini-arc of changing his mind on fatality, accepting the compassion of others, and then sacrificing himself in return for them, is the best arc in the story. But even then it doesn't get to breathe as much as it should due to the limited time spent with him. And that's a big problem for all the characters. The main story only starts at over 20 minutes in, having less of an hour to actually start things in earnest. Imagine if in The Lion King the Circle of Life sequence didn't end until after the hyena chase, and we hadn't even met Scar or Mufasa or Simba at that point. Aladar himself is also just undeniably bland as a character too. He starts off as a noble do-gooder, has a brief moment of doomerism in the cave, and then resumes his prior character model. There's really no way for him to grow as a character in this story. And similarly, if he had the arc of just being one of the more selfish herd before growing into a more compassionate individual, that's just Bruton's arc anyway. In fact, thinking about it now, It was being raised by the lemurs that made Aladar a better person, and the new herd leader, which implies that the dinosaurs are essentially happy with their brutal social Darwinism, which is the norm for them, and would make no effort to change it without him. Crone is okay as a villain, and is the direct root of much of the Darwinism. It is nice that Crone's every man for himself attitude is ultimately what makes him the Predator's choice in the end, but I think they could have done a little bit more with him as a character too, and that he's pretty one-dimensional. He only cares about himself, truly, and making him a ends justify the means type character, with the greater herd's best interest at heart, may have been more interesting. Or having some weakness that made him the more vulnerable one anyway, that he'd be overcompensating for, like some Napoleon dinosaur. Probably the biggest missed opportunity is Baleen though. Baleen gets a stirring speech in the cave that comes from essentially nowhere. She never really gave up at any point or had moments of doomerism herself. She's a static character like Aladar essentially. They do this weakly and briefly with Ema, and then just sort of leave it at that. But I think having Baleen be a depressed doomer over being the last of her kind, and viewing herself as obsolete, only to repeatedly show her worth to the herd with things like the water, with Aladar's pushing and faith in her, and then ultimately culminating in the same scene in the cave, but this time showing that Aladar's faith inspired those around him even when it ran out in himself, and made them stronger as a collective, would have been a lot more emotionally impactful. But many say the biggest missed opportunity is the fact that the dinosaurs talk at all. Indeed, much of the squandering of dinosaurs' value comes from not giving it them a mature tone for a mature audience. But really there's a lot behind this, where the film and paleo aspects intersect. Originally, the film did want to be essentially a documentary, until they apparently visited Framestore at a similar time and saw what was going on with Walking with Dinosaurs. They left disheartened and had to go back to the drawing board. Another idea was the edgy death house drama of Phil Tippett, who promised geezers of blood, endless dinosaur death and sex and poo and not very much else it seems. And many have often pounced on this, claiming this is the dinosaur we should have got, and that would have fixed all the woes. But really, would it? Nothing is said of story or its quality, or even really accuracy. Prehistoric Beast is still amazing, but it also features an ornithomimid as a specialised nest raider before being killed by Deinonychus. Inaccuracy on top of anachronism. Tippett's dinosaur would have been a side grade, remembered as the edgy dinosaur bloodfest that no one had fond childhood memories of due to not being allowed to see the R-rated film. That was no doubt marred by as many inaccuracies and awkwardness as Dinosaur itself. Indeed, despite complaining about Dinosaur's inaccuracies, every time someone brings up something different or an alternate idea from production, it's pretended that this is instantly the better option. The weird first draft ending in the death of the protagonist from the meteorite is simply not it. Ricardo Delgado's artwork is amazing, but it still features an anachronistic mishmash of species. It's worth pondering how much worth the film had the second the team departed Framestore and decided to do something different. There's never really been much detail stemming from those first ideas. And also, it's still Disney we're talking about. They're not doing it for educational purposes. In terms of its validity in the depiction of the dinosaurs, I think all roads would have likely gone to the same place. But Dinosaur does still have an admirable role, in probably bringing a few species to the big screen not seen otherwise. Other than Prehistoric Planet some 20 years later, when would we have found Pachyrhinosaurus? And they also give quite a solid depiction of actual Velociraptor, albeit unfeathered. And on the same note, in those inaccuracies, I think a fair amount stem most chiefly from the film's antagonist, the Carnotaurus. Really, looking at most of the herd, if you swap Iguanodon for a Hadrosaur, you could easily set the film in the Dinosaur Park formation, and accuracy things up a lot more. Well, kill Baleen and you could. Or change her to a lost Alamosaurus. But the Carnotaurus would have to change, ostensibly to Albertosaurus or Gorgosaurus. And therein lies the issue. Changing it to a Tyrannosaur invites comparisons to Tyrannosaurus, an obvious choice for what not to do after Jurassic Park. Other paleomedia of a different vibe didn't have to make this swerve, and in fact gets to pivot into it like Walking With, which gets to show us Tyrannosaurus the animal over Tyrannosaurus the monster. Not so with Dinosaur. There had to be, and successfully was, a clear and concerted effort to make Carnotaurus a very different beast. And indeed, this is quite a good masterclass on how to make a different theropod that still serves as a lumbering, powerful antagonist, but has a completely different vibe. The Carnotaurus walks with its neck in an S shape like a bird, unlike the much more horizontal Tyrannosaurus. Whereas the latter almost sounds like a land whale with its deep bassy tones, the Carnotaurus has a deepened screech for a roar, and mainly harsh, snarling, dog-like growls otherwise. Indeed, with its mobile lips and some jowls too. The Carnotaurus does almost feel like a big angry dog, compared to Jurassic Park's land orca. Some of this is presumably left over from a former draft, where it is meant to be snotty and snarling from the pollen of the first flower. Combine this with the armoured red hide and horns, and the Carnotaurus makes for a memorable foe. Whilst its titanic size relative to the slight actual Carnotaurus is actually pointed out, in a move of life-imitating art, a giant Kenyan abelosaur awaits formal classification, but seems to be close in size to Tyrannosaurus, so the Disney Carnotaurus may well walk again. Also, Dinosaur's zombie walking Parasaurolophus may actually be on the money too, as well as them being massive. At the end of the day, the biggest thing is that this is a Disney film, and in their renaissance too. Tippett's dream of geezers of blood, past which he doesn't seem to have any real selling points, would never have flown. A lot of fanfiction ideas sprouted since wouldn't have flown precisely because it's Disney. And at the same time, no one was really throwing budget behind a dinosaur film like this. The making of Dinosaur, and the various alternate forms that it could have been, are a really interesting topic that another channel should really delve into. It would be cool to have an R-rated dinosaur film in Hollywood with this budget and effects, but clearly we're not there yet. Really, in conclusion, I think Dinosaur is to be enjoyed for what it is. A gorgeous display of music and visual effects once you can skip past the love monkey. With Walking with Dinosaurs making the dinosaur documentary popular, the United States quickly created their own, When Dinosaurs Roamed America. And there is no doubt just in the opening that this is meant to be the American Walking With. The beginning in the modern day that pans back to the prehistoric, the threat of the meteor, the first vocal dinosaur also being Coelophysis, and just look at the box art too. Only when it gets to the X-ray segment of Coelophysis' muscle, and then we get our first talking head section, does it begin to differ, before it leaves Coelophysis for the early Jurassic, and it becomes clear this will be more of a whistle-stop tour over the leisurely half hours of Walking With. Keen to save both on dinosaur screen time, and also to differentiate itself from Walking With, the X-rays and talking heads do occasionally dribble some okay science in there, but still likely leaves most people even relatively in the know, with the feeling the same point could have easily been illustrated via show don't tell. And for the dino kids in the audience, such segments are acidic to their enjoyment of seeing the terrible lizards themselves. The cast lineup manages to squeeze in a few newbies though, with Megapnosaurus as Centaurus, Ceratosaurus and Camarasaurus getting their first real debuts here, although Ceratosaurus is perhaps quite popular in a lot of vintage paleo art. The goal of When Dinosaurs Roamed America is also an interesting and admirable one too. With its Shakespearean narrator and writing and strong identity as a BBC product specifically, Walking With is and always has been a notably British product. The idea of making your own and then instilling a sense of national pride and curiosity with your all-American dinosaurs isn't a bad one, and doubly works well due to how extensive the Mesozoic paleo megafauna of the lower 48 is. Many of the most recognisable and attention-grabbing dinosaurs do come from North America, and the roster is as star-studded as you'd expect. While it's not as good as its predecessors, or followers, like Walking With or Dinosaur Planet, it does still manage to squeeze in some newcomers amidst the Stegos, Sauropods and Rexes. If anything, the problem comes from the fact that due to America's dinosaurs often being the poster children for the group, they're all species that have arguably gotten better fanfare and presentation in other media even at this point in the Golden Age's infancy. But perhaps an interesting timestamp from this era comes from how at the time America was the gold town for dinosaurs, in a way that nowhere else really was. Many places once thought destitute for megafaunal species, are now teeming with impressive and iconic fauna to rival America's. This of course doesn't diminish America's species, but it does show how far we've come in the last 20 years or so, and how much has been discovered since this start of the era of edutainment. Just a few years after, you could have well made When Dinosaurs Roamed South America, though Chased by Dinosaurs got there first, or later kept the acronym for When Dinosaurs Roamed Africa. But there are also some downsides to the era too. There's no doubt that When Dinosaurs Roamed America just suffers to a degree from either being rushed or a lack of budget, as it does regrettably look a lot worse than I ever remembered. very floaty animations, less practical environmental interactions than even Dinosaur Planet, and some very obvious keyframe reverses give it an undeniably janky look compared to the quality of Impossible Pictures. These are forgivable to a degree due to age, time and budget, but yet some of the models are also revolting. Some of the early theropods have ridiculously thin yet mobile necks that are uncomfortable, bordering on unbelievable to look at. The music is also there, not really doing much interesting, but John Goodman's narration is generally a treat, with an established and recognisable American voice, fitting the Mesozoic very nicely, despite the occasionally dodgy pronunciation, in a generally serviceable script. Overall, whilst its lessened production values and rushed pace lead to When Dinosaurs Roamed America being the first of many to fall awkwardly short of walking with in most meaningful ways, it's still a fair shot at an all-American dinosaur documentary that still manages to squeeze in a few new taxa that would later find permanent homes in semi-regular paleomedia. With Goodman's dulcet tones yet laid-back attitude smoothing things over, you could do a lot worse for a retro hour-and-a-half of dinosaur media. Another decent enough hour-and-a-half of retro dinosaur media also comes from The Lost World, a BBC adaptation of Conan Doyle's original adventure story. With a ton of CGI models sitting around, the early 2000s habit of adapting Conan Doyle for Christmas viewing on the BBC, and Haynes' desire for a dinosaur narrative over a documentary, the stage was set for a festive romp. And The Lost World is generally quite a solid watch, differing significantly and for the better from the book, in that a lot of the dodgier aspects of a book published in 1912 are quite smartly changed without damaging the narrative. And when the narrative does make its own changes, it does suit a more enlightened time in other ways too. Rather than being lauded as heroes on their return, the primary characters decide to tell the press and scientific community it was a loose end, and what was undeniably a pterosaur was actually a vulture. But in doing so, they do it to preserve the Lost World and all of its inhabitants a little longer from the outside world. In general, the attitude is surprisingly, probably even unbelievably, woke for pre-war Britain, with a cast of adventurers generally believing they shouldn't interfere with the plateau, and its people and animal residents living there. For a deeper look into this, and the narrative in general, I'd really recommend Cold Crash Pictures' video on it. As for the dinosaurs and general paleo content, it's pretty solid. As you'd expect really, as with Impossible Pictures behind it, that's hardly a surprise. And Allosaurus takes centre stage as the main dinosaur of the programme, lurking in the main story of the first episode that culminates in a solid chase sequence, and then getting the dramatic finale of the programme and second episode in the attack on the village. That's overall a well-shot, scored and directed bit of dinosaur mayhem. There's a few snippets of other Walking With members, like Diplodocus, Daedon, Iguanodon, and the reused Lielanosaura, presumably as a Hypsilophodont of some sort. Pteranodon also gets a few notable scenes in the escape of the chick at the end, and the set-piece battle in collecting it, and generally relishes in all the screen time it never got in Walking With proper. As the improved retelling of a classic adventure story that adds a bit more substance to it, but without losing the thrills, combined with excellent effects that provide the last hurrah for some of the old Walking With models, The Lost World is generally a very solid slice of narrative paleomedia that's now pretty difficult to find nowadays, but is worth it if you can. As was mentioned, The Lost World does feel almost like a bit of a warm-up for Primeval in some ways. And as I'll discuss later, narrative versus documentary generally caused the end of the Golden Age. But at least The Lost World actually does things competently and with reasonably solid dinosaurs too. But of course, it wasn't just dinosaurs that the two pillars of the Golden Era made popular again, and there's also a number of documentaries on various Cenozoic animals, usually Pleistocene megafauna, that spawned from the success of Walking With Beasts as well. Probably the most forgotten of these is ITV's Extinct, which seemed to receive little broadcast elsewhere, was released out of the shadow of the BBC in the UK, and generally received little attention on release, despite a companion book and a swift VHS release to try and promote it too, which is perhaps a shame, as Extinct succeeds where a lot of other documentaries failed, and that it perhaps most successfully manages to break free from the Walking With mould to do its own thing, whereas other documentaries at the time still tried to essentially make an episode of Walking With, which is to say a narrative following a focal animal or group with a created story, sometimes stuffed with talking head segments to pad runtime or provide originality. Extinct rather frames its episodes as whodunits, as to why the various species of Pleistocene megafauna went extinct. Accompanying this are small vignettes of a CGI animal that is often suggested by the narrative, explicitly in the case of the thylacine, to be an endling or close to it as it eventually meets its doom. But the core focus is more on finding out why they went extinct, and interviewing relevant personnel to do so. There's only a few minutes of the actual animals in the half-hour episodes, a decision which allows for less ropey animation than some of its contemporaries, though nothing too ambitious happens. A Smilodon hunt is quick cuts of flashing sabres and thundering hooves, before a dead bison is shown, for instance. And there are several decent prosthetics used in the same fashion as Walking with Beasts. There is just enough to keep kids maybe less invested in the science and discussion interested though, and it generally succeeds in tying the message to the footage too. The CGI models are okay. The Smilodon, in an effort to look less like a normal cat, winds up looking a bit like evil Garfield, but everyone else is generally as you'd expect. The usual suspects of saber-tooth, mammoth, thylacine and dodo are here, but are pleasantly joined by the great hawk and megaloceros too, making for a solid set of species, even if the episodes often wind up revolving around how it's humanity's fault they go extinct anyway. But this did make me realise something. That in the Golden Era, at least, Cenozoic species, and especially Pleistocene megafauna, are so often portrayed with a certain gloominess to them, that the dinosaurs and other Mesozoic species weren't. Even Walking with Dinosaurs in its extinction ends reasonably well, with the point on birds, and both Dinosaur Planet and When Dinosaurs Roamed America clutch their extinction episodes with some optimism too. Whilst Extinct is the purest form of this, Wild New World and Monsters We Met both have similar vibes, and generally don't shy away from themes of extinction. Practically, this likely allows for the inclusion of human actors, who are still likely cheaper and easier than CGI animals, and live-action animals too, to portray a changing world into the modern one we know. The latter point also applies well for Watsonian applications as well. There is some fairly clear desire to hammer home such notions, perhaps again to differentiate itself from the almost human-free Walking with Beasts, that could afford the decadence of 30 minutes of CGI animals across the screen. So overall, despite being one of the most forgotten pieces of paleomedia from the Golden Age, likely due to its comparative lack of footage compared to most other contenders, Extinct is still an accomplished little documentary that provides an interesting slice of extinction theories from the time, and a successful escape from the Walking With format. Indeed, it's probably fair to say that the Pleistocene and Cenozoic in general differentiated itself from Walking With much more successfully than the Mesozoic, which even today often struggles with trying to outdo or change from Walking With. Two documentaries you could probably call sister documentaries, in that they use the same CGI models and share footage, were Wild New World and Monsters We Met. The former essentially functions as a broad overview of various Ice Age fauna, with cuts back to the present day, and various scientist snippets too. There's plenty usage of extant species, and generally some reasonable looking shots of such species juxtaposed against the CGI models, or shots like lions in the snow, which were presumably animal actors. In some cases the two even directly interact, and there's a pretty interesting sequence of a jaguar hunting a glyptodont too. Wild New World is decent enough, and has some quite nice and educational segments on things like Blue Babe, and the whodunit of his death. Guthrie's Fauna of the Mammoth Steppe likely being a core text for the researchers for the script presumably. There's also a few newcomers too, with this perhaps being the screen debut for Homotherium, albeit constantly and only referred to as the scimitar-toothed cat. In the more southern episodes, mastodons are also given equal billing to mammoths, and Columbian mammoths are also given equal billing to the woolly ones. So a decent job is done on the extinct elephant diversity too, and showing just how successful this family was in the Americas. Arctodus also gets its dues, but has the far more prevalent scenes a year later in Monsters We Met. Despite a reasonable release, Wild New World is very hard to find online, or in any physical media, but happily its later cousin has been uploaded in entirety. Monsters We Met is quite a unique documentary in the Golden Age, in that it focuses much more on the people than the wildlife. Rather than focal animals, it follows groups of Pleistocene humans, often as they arrive in a new area. It's almost like asking what if Walking with Cavemen was actually good, because good it is. Whilst only really having 2 episodes, with the third essentially half-assing a New Zealand episode, whilst also serving as a series recap, the 2 main ones are really quite memorable. The Australian one showcases Megalania in what I believe is its screen debut as well, with the episode having a slow build-up to the eventual clash and then Megalania's defeat. Rewatching it, the future predator male's death in the season finale of Primeval feels very reminiscent of it, with the unique vision mode obviously inspired by Predator, and being blinded by that sense. There's some good scenes with Diprotodon and Genionis too, and a strength of Monsters We Met is that despite having humans centre stage, the prehistoric life never feels forgotten. The relevance of the animals to human life keeps them as important cast members, and ensures some good scenes too, with information of said animals being skillfully breadcrumbed into the scenes as well. The narratives are generally intriguing enough, and the narration tells us enough about the people and their stories that the lack of understandable dialogue never hamstrings the life or death struggles they go through. They're still named for convenience, and they talk plenty, we just can't understand them, rather allowing the fair acting and narration to let you fill in the gaps. This refusal to talk down to the audience and not insult their intelligence is very refreshing. It's genuinely quite a unique 2 hours of TV, and in some ways almost feels like a live-action remake-ified version of Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal, as really there has been nothing else quite like Monsters We Met. The Australian one is perhaps the more optimistic one, revolving around the discovery of a new land and the strange creatures within it, then to the build-up and defeat of Megalania. Here, man's dominion over nature is more of a victory, in that it's an aboriginal dragon slaying, but the North American one in contrast is a lot more bleak. Perhaps the most memorable scene from all the episodes is where an Octodus runs down one of the cavemen, killing him in the trees. And the whole thing is marvellously shot in a way to create this constant sense of unease. Attempts at stealth or jump scares or even darkness are completely abandoned. And moreover, broad daylight and open spaces really enhance the threat. The bear is faster, it knows your smell, and there's nowhere to hide. It makes no effort to hide itself because it doesn't need to. The conclusion almost feels foregone. Its inexorable approach is drawn out over several minutes with almost no music, to better allow the hoarse breathing of man and beast and the crunching of snow under their feet to deliver the atmosphere instead. It's not just man and bear either. Plenty more animals like mammoths dot the scene, but only serve as a mute and unsympathetic audience to remind us how isolated the single caveman is. After all, the bear was drawn to their mammoth kill. It's a brilliant slice of paleomedia in a unique series. Even after this, the American episode still has a gloomy sense of foreboding over it too. The cavewoman's infant dies of malnutrition due to the declining megafauna, and the clan don morbid death masks of slate blue clay, and the mother wails in the funeral procession as they bury the baby. Impressively, for a series about how man shaped the world at the end of the Pleistocene, and caused the extinction of many large vertebrates, it never spills over into something you'd call glazing today. Man is never given an easy time of it, and in the series it's fair to say that the humans win the war, but lose plenty battles along the way. The Arctodus kills one person, Megalania another, and a modern saltwater crocodile takes another tribe member in the Australian episode too. Despite the end of the megafaunal game, they're never shown to be having an easy time of things. However, despite being excellent, it's still not perfect. Again, both Monsters We Met and Wild New World lack the budget of Beasts, despite being a BBC production, and this shows. Like Extinct, the animation is often unambitious and uses quick cuts and prosthetic close-ups for dramatic things like kills and fights. There are a few of these every now and then, a likely rotoscoped Smilodon kill and a tar pit fight, but nothing as decadent as Beast's Macrocenia hunt, or Daedon battles. In fact, Beast's footage does crop up a few times, and sharp-eyed viewers will also recognise the same stock footage of a wolf from Mammoth Journey. Nothing wrong with this necessarily, but the word padding does undeniably spring to mind. Speaking of Smilodon, some of the models are undeniably ugly. Stars of the show Arctodus and Megalania, in fact most of the Australian cast are quite good, and the mammoths look okay too, but the Smilodon both moves weirdly and looks like it ate a bee, and Homotherium never really gets very much to do either. The Haast's eagle is also something of a low point, just being live acted by a harpy eagle, and then overlaid onto the human footage too. Generally, both series were quite a success, with a fresh feel and interesting cast list that manages to work around a limited budget. Monsters We Met really stands out as a unique gem from this era, the like of which really hasn't been attempted again since, and only really feels more comparable to fiction entries in paleomedia rather than other documentaries. I remember being incredibly excited for both at the time, as far as lying on my bedroom floor trying to pick out the narration as it aired past my bedtime. Revisiting it as an adult, it's quite pleasing to see it hold up so well, especially where many others didn't, and that its unique ideas still feel fresh today. Perhaps the most well-known of the United States offerings to paleomedia from this era is Dinosaur Planet. Another focal animal following show, but broken up with talking head segments from paleontologist Scott Sampson. It can be easy to write Dinosaur Planet off, but a closer look reveals a lot of quality here. The first of perhaps the series' main successes is cast diversity. There are a ton of dinosaurs here who had never gotten screen debuts before, and in some cases since, and far more who would not get another one until years later. Whilst the focal dinosaurs are often carnivores, the uses of Daspletosaurus and Pyroraptor are reasonably fresh ones, as an unknown dromaeosaur and a non-Tyrannosaurus tyrannosaur. In fact, it's probably quicker to count dinosaurs that already had screen debuts here, as Dinosaur Planet exceeds even Walking with Dinosaurs by shying away from the late Jurassic and Hell Creek. The research done both in general and to find interesting new species is commendable for sure. But perhaps the best story comes from a known species, with the Velociraptor episode. And there's no real way around it. Dinosaur Planet probably gives the best depiction of Velociraptor seen in paleomedia to date. Feathered, variable and not obligately social, often subsisting off small prey, getting their asses kicked by Protoceratops, generally living in the shadow of larger dinosaurs, not constantly going remember when we filmed this but with snow leopards in real life. It's all unique, excellent and accurate. There's no doubt a certain mythology around Velociraptor solely due to its name and association, stemming from the larger fictional dromaeosaurs of Jurassic Park. And there's rarely a better example of this than interpretations of fighting dinosaurs. Invariably, people try to argue that the foot by the throat of the Protoceratops is puncturing the windpipe or tearing open the aorta, inflicting some fatal wound on the Protoceratops that was inevitably part of the grand plan. The notion that Velociraptor didn't in fact pierce anything, and was scrabbling pathetically to free itself from being used as a mop, can't possibly be true. They're built to kill, not be killed. Duh. And it's called Velociraptor. That's not a name that loses fights. Refreshingly, Dinosaur Planet bucks that trend. The Velociraptors aim for the Protoceratops' eggs over the adults, who are borderline off limits as you'd expect for a glorified rat trap of a dinosaur. One male is killed by Pronocephalae, but arguably the biggest threats feel like the Oviraptors, who are almost sort of portrayed as the hyenas to Whitetip's leopard, almost trailing her through the narrative to benefit themselves. It's a creative and interesting change of pace. In fact, most of the focal dinosaurs aren't the top dogs. Pod is playing second fiddle to everyone on his original island. Alpha and Dragonfly are both at the mercy of the Maposaurus, and only Das is the species that's the top dog, albeit being the most useless member of the family. Outside of the focal animals too, the narratives are quite solid and inventive. Whitetip's journey is less of a journey, and more of just a struggle to survive, which suits the depiction of Velociraptor, where making it through the night alive is already an accomplishment. Alpha's journey from hatchling back to her own nesting site like a turtle is reliable if predictable, and is more spruced by being a dual narrative with the Alcosaurus Dragonfly. Alpha does undeniably hog more of the story, with Dragonfly more being a recurring antagonist over equal screen time character. But it's a nice spin on things. Little Das's hunt is actually really inventive, with it almost being a Fury Road-like episode, in that the entire narrative is literally just a prolonged hunt, taking place over less than 12 hours, but still managing to pack in a good amount of events before the eruption. Pod's journey is one where the narrative probably overtakes the paleontological worth of the episode, and is in an awkward spot to judge, because it's a really nice little paleo narrative that feels like a live-action spiritual successor to Raptor Red, but forsakes a lot of accuracy to get there, and is probably the episode that's aged the worst, with Romanian island paleontology really kicking off after the episode aired and bringing giants to Hategopteryx to the forefront of the field. Other episodes have aged reasonably well, some almost being prescient. Whilst it is hard to believe that Buck could tank a Mother Daspletosaurus bite, or why Mum decided to nibble down like Homer Simpson eating instead of shearing the leg off, this is a really good display of how cursorial hunting may have gone down in Tyrannosaurs, which were, after all, exceptionally adapted to warg, and the hunt being the whole episode nullifies the slowness with which it'd be portrayed with otherwise. Actual bits of paleontological findings are baked in elsewhere too. Dragonfly's death is a reference to the fact Alcosaurus was discovered with a crushed skull, for instance, and the fighting dinosaurs needs little further explanation. So overall, Dinosaur Planet was really quite good. The best depiction of Velociraptor, a unique and well-characterized cast, solid episode narratives, What could go wrong from here? What could possibly bring down this series to...
That's right. I'm the one talking. I'm the narrator. The game they've chosen is called Walk Away from the Herd and Let Everyone Know About It.
It really is a shame that Dinosaur Planet's narration is what it is. A huge amount of effort was put into the show, selecting taxa to give good narratives, writing said narratives, and doing good research to present them as accurately as possible. And almost all of it is undermined by the god-awful narration that leaves the viewer without any doubt that dinosaurs are for children. Not only does Dinosaur Planet undo its own effort, it also generally undoes a lot of work prior, better media did before it. Or would if you took it too seriously. I really find it completely indefensible. It's not especially funny if you're older than 8, and it's just generally like nails on a chalkboard. It's horrible, stupid and childish, turning a punchy attempt at American Walking with Dinosaurs into an out-and-out cringe compilation. In terms of painful Americanisms too, I think the dinosaurs can also get a bit anthropomorphized for the worse. Little Das and his family are the worst contenders, seemingly having a concept of abstract punishment. And the wail of Dragonfly's mate also spills over into melodrama after his death too. Pod's episode can also walk a bit of a fine line here at times as well. I also think the narration makes poor Scott Sampson come across as worse too. He really feels like the dry bones, Jamie Hyneman compared to Slater's Adam Savage, if you also wanted to kill Savage every episode. The dorky narration really makes stopping for a straight-faced explanation of things feel extra flat. And if you're writing a defense for it now, I don't think I can stress enough how I don't want to hear it, and that nothing can convince me this is good. But, to be fair to Slater, it's not the only thing bad about it. Budget aside, the designs and sound designs of the dinosaurs, both here and in When Dinosaurs Roamed America, really leave a lot to be desired. There's a lot of boring, solid colours, and very little in the way of stylish, naturalised patterns. Essentially nothing in either show became a paleo art meme after, and there's a reason for that. Most models are okay, which makes things like the horrifying Myosaurus stick out even worse. Both model and animations are ugly, and Dinosaur Planet has a bit of a bad habit of just speeding up walking animations and calling it a run, in quite a few of its taxa. Most vocalizations are just stock animal sounds with essentially no remixing, so get used to that particular elephant scream and lion roar combo. As well, the talking head segments. These aren't awful, but do often feel a bit bungled. Dr. Sampson often tells us that this is a theory or a best guess, and then we see in the episode that said theory is being presented unequivocally. Both segments often just wind up undermining each other a lot for that very reason. They also often break the flow of the narrative quite aggravatingly, and for every good one that elucidates matters of the episode, there's completely pointless ones that feels like it's pointing out water is wet. With the initial success of Walking With, and the fact that such paleo media often tries to present itself as a nature documentary, talking heads have always been a bit of a contentious point. Dinosaur Planet provides ammunition for both sides of the argument, as a bit of a mixed bag. I think at the end of the day, as they say in Mad Men, it's just not Anne Margaret. Walking with Dinosaurs was a tough act to follow, and with a lesser budget, Dinosaur Planet just can't really compete in a lot of its major production values that do hurt it both full stop and in comparison. The music is an example of this, as the music is actually quite good, the punchy little intros especially, but every soundtrack since is just dwarfed by Bartlett's. Dinosaur Planet does try, and for the most part succeeds, with excusable hiccups in production values, less excusable ones in design, and generally horrible narration, being the major things that really turn those with higher brain functions from remembering this show as fondly as they could have. It is a real pity, as with a few tweaks this rough-cut gem could have been a genuine diamond. One of the last slices of media to come at the end of the Golden Age, and indeed its downfall, was Prehistoric Park. Whilst highly beloved by dino kids today and of its era, a hard-eyed look at Prehistoric Park doesn't really do it any favours. One thing it really makes me wonder is if paleo media has to have a point. If there needs to be an educational factor, or if it can just be drama. Certainly, my favourite film, King Kong, has dinosaurs aplenty without a single scrap of educational value, and indeed specific design choices to steer them away from being such in favour of Hollywood drama. But no matter what answer you land on, it still won't save Prehistoric Park from clearly having no idea what direction it wanted to go in with any of its ideas, and how they even wind up cancelling each other out. Prehistoric Park tries to imitate a slice-of-life zoo drama, which have always been very popular in the UK, with things like the originally named and long-running Animal Park, which covers Longleat Safari Park in wherever Longleat Safari Park is. But half the point of a slice of life is that it's non-scripted, and it changes day to day, and that's the intrigue of finding out what goes on behind the scenes. By being scripted, and having no option but to be so, Prehistoric Park has already neutered the most prevalent aspect of its core inspiration. This also means too much is never really allowed to happen either. Compared to, say, Primeval, the drama aspect of Prehistoric Park never really takes off especially well, as there's just not that much that can realistically happen in these storylines, that have to remain in the confines of a zoo. There is the fairly obvious plotline of a breakout that inevitably happens and gets wrapped up in less time than half an episode, and that's essentially the height of it. On the other side of the time portal, there's occasionally attempts to spice things up, with the occasional disaster too. But overall, the Paleo side of it also suffers from this too much on its plate approach, and that half the runtime inevitably has to come back to Parkkeeper Bob as he bumbles around the facility feeding the wildlife. And half the time we spend with our animals in their environment is fairly rinse and repeat, never allowing for too much to go on. There's also fairly minimal educational value, though that likely wasn't the goal. And with Nigel's goal of bringing back the most iconic prehistoric life, the cast list is similarly a ton of things we've seen before. In universe, it's not clear what exactly the zoo achieves in the long term. Most of the gold species brought back are either single individuals or direct relatives, and what the plan is when they die in a few years is never really said, or if Nigel's planning his own Vastatosaurus breeding colony with Terence and Matilda. It's just a temporary attraction for a zoo, and there's no hope of any Mesozoic rewilding. So where do things actually go from here? It also feels undeniably weird when Marvin meets all these other animals in the past, and ostensibly just declares them worthy of death and being forgotten by extension of making no effort to take them back too. Animal-wise, the designs are fairly good. Again, it's Impossible Pictures, so there's some nice actual patterning, rather than boring solid colours. Though I wouldn't say they ever really push the boat out like they did with Walking With. The higher production values and experience of the team really do show here. There's some nice environmental interaction, the sound mixing is better, things move pretty nicely. It's all just of a pretty high standard. The T-Rex does look a little bit weird though. The numerous T-Rexes of the 2000s were all sort of dodgy in their own way, and this one is no exception. With its snatched waist and buccal fat removal cheekbones, this almost feels like an attempt at an Insta-influencer Rex. And the very dorky high-footed run they do is a bit weird too. But overall, these are easily some of the best looking and animated dinosaurs of the golden era. Impossible Pictures stay winning. There was another show ITV was running at the time too, Wild at Heart, about the Trevanian family who moved to South Africa to open a vet practice. This is also where Prehistoric Park was filmed if you didn't know. Presumably as ITV had some filming deal with South Africa at the time. It was a weekly ray of African sun and wildlife into dreary UK winter homes, just in time for the Sunday roast. And was the exact sort of thing people think goes on behind the scenes in a fenced reserve, or vet practice, who have no experience with such. Someone brings in their pet lion with a gammy leg and after a checkup it gets released back into the wild as everyone cries tears of happiness. When of course should almost never use captive bred animals for reintroductions if possible. A reserve with a healthy population of lions would just kill it on entry. A UK vet would be incredibly unlikely to just be allowed in as a wildlife vet without going through Ondersport. Half the things they actually reintroduce do seem to be invasive species. etc, etc, etc. But it plodded along as fairly reliable if repetitive family drama, never really pushing the boat out especially far, and always making sure to have the happiest or most optimistic ending possible. And when writing this and thinking about it, it really made me realise that Prehistoric Park is just Wild at Heart for dino kids. Dopey, aspirational, feel-good drama that ultimately collapses if thought about for more than 5 seconds. And it just sort of hopes the audience won't do that. It sets a goal any child who likes dinosaurs can relate to, of both having a fun prehistoric adventure, with enough risk to be thrilling, but never actually killing anyone. Wild at Heart did that though, R.I.P. Amanda Holden's character, and bringing dinosaurs back, and then washes its hands of ever having to deal with any of the practicalities of doing so that aren't also fun, or thrilling TV, like a breakout or wrestling a triceratops with a tractor. It really is just cozy tea time comfort watching, and never aspires or succeeds to be much more. Which is fine as a kid, but really ends the golden age on a bit of a limp note considering with where it started. When the Golden Age did of course peter out into awesome bro slop and weak dramas, the latter does actually provide a possible reshaping of paleomedia at the end of said age, that also caused its end, the end of documentary and the beginning of drama. It's hard to tell if anything caused this specifically. You could make the argument King Kong did, making lots of money and having plentiful dinosaurs. But no matter which way you slice it, it does seem a shift occurred at the end of the 2000s. Prehistoric Park badly bridges the gap between drama and faux documentary, and Impossible Pictures and Tim Haynes made Primeval, purely a drama with fictional prehistoric animals based on but exaggerated from real taxa. The US made its awful Terra Nova, and the Golden Age had firmly come to an end. In contrast, the Silver Age, of which we currently live in, is marked much more by its variety, in terms of everything. Changes in the entertainment landscape and the rise of video games, and the ability to make and showcase independent projects yourself, has resulted in a much broader spread of properties and genres, rather than a world dominated mostly by documentaries. But the era of documentaries was a treat to be alive and a dino kid in. Changes in marketing and support and the general freshness of the internet meant there was so much stuff running adjacent to the projects mentioned here, that it provided a feast for dino kids. Just about everything had an accompanying book and website, and the old BBC website for the Walking With series was an excellent educational resource to get kids into science, and thinking just more seriously about dinosaurs, and by extension the natural world. I don't think it's a coincidence that this lack of support and scaffolding has caused distinct shifts in paleo communities and attitudes of dino kids today. Although to be fair, the era of content they got probably doomed them from the start. Nowadays, if such things exist, they're all essentially on the official YouTube channel for the property, so be sure to like and subscribe. On that note, do like and subscribe. But to me, if you liked the video, and to other ones I've made as well, I very often chat about paleomedia on here, and other things featuring big lizards too, so if that interests you then be sure to sign up. And thanks for watching too, but especially thanks to my patrons. Bonecrusher Hyena, Toxic Wolf, The Super Duper, DJ, My Best Friend Loba, Samburgo, K. Sandom, Octavia of the Fifth Fleet, Nickname 3110, Kieran McCarthy, Flyguns Archives, Hui Hui, Jabin, The Belted Horned Warbler, Roberto Hernandez, Big Man Blastoise, Nathan Crosh, Johnny, Oni, Tim Gojira, Teddy KGB, Insert Nickname, Waffles, Slashmaster 101, Dapperaptor, Godzilla Prime 2, Original Username, Small Squid, Litton Gamer 111, Evilly, Howleth, Archosaur Queen, Tommy Choi, Jacob Wilcox, Seth Fake Last Name, Dodecablos, and Basugazu Bacharatsu Bachamatsu, who help keep the channel going with their generosity. There are of course a few things I've missed in here. There were a few weird documentaries at the time that colour changed Walking with Dinosaurs footage, and tried to market it as being about new animals. One or two things that I've also missed or forgotten, and of course the truth about killer dinosaurs, which will be discussed a lot later in a different script. But this was essentially made as a medley video about things I had thoughts on but not enough for a full video. So here we are. I hope you enjoyed it, and next time it's back to Monster Hunter for more species analysis videos.